Hello, 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 hello. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as usual, is the good man himself, Phil McKenzie. And, boy, Phil, we're here today to talk about fights that are, wait for it, actually good. And I could not be more excited about that. How are you feeling about UFC 231?
It is awesome.
Yeah.
It is great from pretty much top to bottom. There are very few fights in it which are... There are some fights which look like they could be boring, but there are almost none which are boring and irrelevant. Everything has some meaning. There's a ton of action fights. There's some awesome prospects, and it's topped off by two of the best fights you could make in the UFC at the moment, aka Holloway-Ortega and Shevchenko-Jedrzejczyk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess that's really all that needs to be said. I'll give you guys the brief rundown of what we're gonna talk about today, but shit, the reason this card is good is because the fights are good, so we'll get into them as quickly as possible. As Phil just said, the main event, Max Holloway versus Brian Ortega, is fascinating, and I don't know about you, Phil. We'll get into this perhaps. I'm still a little worried about Max Holloway's physical well-being, and potentially his mental well-being as well after all of the issues he's gone through this year. We'll get into that. But still a very compelling matchup, as it was the last time it was made. And we'll be covering that in Segment 1. Segment 2, Valentina Shevchenko and Joanna Jedrzejczyk are fighting for the vacant, correct? The vacant women's flyweight title. And that'll be good. This will be their fourth fight, though the last three were contested in Muay Thai, not MMA. Valentina Shevchenko having won all of them. So we'll see if anything has changed in that matchup now that both women have established themselves as elite mixed martial artists. And then after that, in segment 3, we are going to get on to such matchups as Cowboy Oliveira versus Gunnar Nelson, Jimmy Manuwa versus Thiago Santos, holy shit, light heavyweight silliness, and Claudia Gadelha versus Nina Ansaroff, a meaningful contenders style fight, and this women's strawweight division there. So, featherweights, the champion, Brian Ortega. Because I brought it up already, how are you feeling about Max Holloway right now? And any thoughts? Any concerns? Any reservations?
Yeah, I'm still worried. I mean, there are people who are concerned on Twitter who have posted up like footage of him in interviews and saying that he's slurring, and other people who have said that this is just, nerves and he's just Hawaiian. Yeah. It's something that I'm still concerned about because they never found out what was wrong with him. And I feel like this is something of a leap into the dark. And that kind of darkness is very, very scary. Because Max Holloway is... There's no one in the UFC, no champion, who you could look at and say is more living his moment than Max Holloway. Mm-hmm. Like, there was no one who enjoyed his title fights more. If you looked at him against Jose Aldo, there's no one who looked more kind of invincible and young and just thrilled with everything that he was doing than Max Holloway. And even this being said, despite the fact that he had, an absurdly hard, long route to the title, considering who he was and where he came from, he came in as I think he was 19 years old when he debuted in the UFC and fought Dustin Poirier. Mm-hmm. I mean, and he fought Dustin Poirier in his first fight in the UFC, which is completely insane. And just that he battled his way through all that stuff. And eventually he seemed like the best example of what a UFC champion could be. And to think that maybe that journey might have irreparably damaged him in some way is frankly horrifying.
Yeah, I mean, and it wasn't a journey until the title level, I don't think, that even saw him taking that much damage. But of course, like a really important thing to keep in mind, those were some scrappy ass fights with Jose Aldo. Max had to rely on his chin. He's had a couple other moments like that, I guess, but it's important to keep in mind that like training and weight cutting are both things that also have a huge impact on cumulative brain trauma. So like we know that Max's cut to featherweight is very difficult. I think there's still very good reason to be concerned that he will at least have trouble making the cut this time around. And even if he does, like, I think a lot of people, myself included, are hoping that maybe this is his last fight at 145. But also, you know, like, does Max Holloway strike you as the kind of guy who goes easy in training? He strikes me as somebody who probably gets into some slugfests in the gym, and you know, is all about that crazy mental preparation and just, yeah, it's a concern. And it's especially a concern against a guy like Brian Ortega. I mean, let's not forget, like, Ortega is the third round finish machine. You know, he's Yoel Romero, in the featherweight division, maybe with a few different traits, but it's not like he can't hit. It's not like he can't, rack up damage over the course of a long and brutal fight. We've certainly seen him do that more than a couple times. Even dropping rounds, he still in some ways seems to get reads on his opponent and get better and more dangerous as the fight goes on. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the thing, is that Holloway's chin has been one of the greatest we've ever seen in mixed martial arts. I'm not like ashamed to, I don't think it's controversial to say. I mean, he took Jose Aldo's and Conor McGregor's biggest shots and looked perturbed by them, let's say, but not exactly, like, he wasn't rocked, he wasn't staggered, let alone knocked down. He's someone that we've never seen significantly hurt in a fight, and a lot of that, I think, is, like you alluded to, the combination of someone who both has an amazing chin and has tremendous confidence in an amazing chin that allows him to. And so, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he has taken a lot of shots. So from my perspective, I'm not necessarily worried that he loses to Ortega, although I am a huge Holloway fan. But I am significantly worried that he is damaged unseen.
Yeah.
That there's a non-zero chance that he just shouldn't be in this sport.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that still concerns me a lot. But outside of that, you know, as we said, it's an unknown at the moment. It's black space. So outside of that, we just have to look at the fight we've got in front of us and assume, you know, hope and pray that Holloway is who he was, that this was a freakish one-off occurrence caused by a sudden late notice dramatic weight cut, and just, you know, hope that he's still in one piece.
Yep. For as long as possible, at least. So yeah, the matchup itself. Yeah, it's funny. We discussed this one already once before, and this is one of those matchups that, this was in fact the last episode of Dr. Patrick Wyman's Heavy Hands career, and the first episode of Phil's, or it may have been your second episode, because we did two with you.
It was the first, I think.
Okay.
But
so we'll just go with that because it sounds more romantic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds better. So yeah, I mean, this was the era changing of the guard sort of fight for this show, and despite it being a matchup we've already discussed, I'm still not 100% sure how I think it plays out. It's one of those matchups that's just so endlessly compelling because there are tons and tons of X factors. Both guys are extremely dangerous and adaptable. And, yeah, I think we could be in for, like, I don't know, a quick finish, 5 rounds, of action with big momentum swings. I could see this fight going any number of ways. But I would love to hear your thoughts on, like, the general style matchup, such as it is. It's kind of a, you know, these are unusual, unique fighters in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and in some ways, they're not entirely dissimilar fighters in that we're talking two enormous featherweights that put a lot of boxing volume on the opponent. This is something that Ortega's definitely come into more so than Holloway has, you know, as in Holloway has been doing it for a long time, and Ortega has kind of grown into that kind of style. But in that kind of way, it is something of a mirror match. And I think, you know, we've looked at, when we've been discussing this fight, we have talked about, you know, what's the most relevant fight to look at from that perspective. And it is Ortega Moicano. And that was the fight where we first saw kind of Ortega as a real significant offensive boxing threat.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of speaks to the general narrative of this fight, because given Ortega as a static concern, you know, if you look at him and you say, this is the guy who is going to be fighting Holloway, he will lose. And you can say that about both the Moicano fight and the Edgar fight as well. He is simply not defensively sound enough, and whilst you can see like he's growing into his ability to kind of work off the jab to hit counters, he's not there yet. But it's the fact of how much he's improved between those fights.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fact that he went from being a mediocre striker to being a good striker, to being someone who was able to get Frankie Edgar out of there with, and on rewatch, much less trouble than I thought.
Yeah,
the first time.
Right.
Just because you like a lot of other people, I remember him sort of losing until he won, and that was sort of true. But he really wasn't losing very badly, and you can clearly tell what he was looking for when you go back and you watch it when you go back and watch it again.
Mm-hmm. It was about sort of back and forth, and then, much faster than Brian Ortega usually does, he picked up on the opening he wanted, and you could see him piece it together over the course of like 20 or 30 seconds, and he got the finish. So, yeah, I don't know. Like, there are a lot of intangible qualities that make Brian Ortega a threatening challenger, the things that I sort of enable maybe that quick improvement, like watching the Moicano fight, seeing him, like somewhat effectively, not it was still back and forth. Brian Ortega's fights are always back and forth. And that is one thing that Max Holloway can boast about that Brian Ortega cannot, is that Max Holloway is a much more consistent round winner. Even at the elite level, he has had more rounds where he has just comfortably controlled the fight. But Ortega put a ton of pressure on Moicano, and at times successfully nullified what I think we can all agree is one of the best jabs in the featherweight division right now by applying that pressure, by being a super aggressive counterpuncher and showing off levels of head movement and combination punching, especially body punching, that we had never seen from him before up to that point. And one of those little things that stands out to me, like the confidence, the poise of Ortega comes through in these details, is how well he manages to keep his eyes on Moicano despite constantly having his face busted up by that jab. He just keeps moving into punching range, slipping, and keeping his eyes trained on his target, looking for the follow-up shots, always thinking 2 or 3 steps into the combination. Like, those are not skills that you would expect from someone who is so much less experienced with his striking than someone like Max Holloway. It speaks to his ability to improve quickly, that he just has those fundamental, I don't even know if you can call them skills, but just those fundamental abilities already in place. So yeah, direction of movement is always a big question with fights like this, like who gets to pressure, who gets to come forward. Ortega clearly likes to pressure. He likes to take the fight to his opponents. Do you think that, because we've seen Holloway really effective off the back foot, in fact, I think that was maybe like his original style, you could say, going back to the Poirier fight, the Dennis Bermudez fight. Remember, these were fights that were like within the first 6 or 7 bouts of his professional career when he was barely not a teenager. And back then he was, pivoting, moving around on the outside, working off a jab. Do you think it might be a good idea for him to back someone like Brian Ortega up, though? Can such a thing be done? But, how do you feel about Ortega as a fighter? What are his mental weaknesses? What are his stylistic weaknesses that a flexible adapter like Holloway could take advantage of?
So I think the question in the matchup isn't necessarily forward versus backwards. Mm. It's lateral movement. And I think that's where Holloway has his advantage. And I think the question, I think a more recent fight we can look back here, which isn't necessarily relevant in terms of the actual physical style of the opponent, but is relevant in terms of kind of size and sort of maybe unexpected path forward, is Holloway-Pettis. Because I think a lot of us expected, we were just like, well, Max throws a ton of volume. Max is a very good boxer. And, Pettis has been historically very vulnerable to getting pushed into the fence and just getting fucked up. And so he has little chance. He's just going to get buzzsawed by Holloway. He's going to come forward through the kicks. And that wasn't really what we saw happen. Instead, we saw Holloway consistently moving off to the side to nullify the round kicks. And I think that's something that we still haven't necessarily seen from Ortega, is an ability to cut off lateral movement. I still think his pressure I still think we'll have to see how his pressure really functions against pivots and kind of close and lateral movement, because I think that's something that we've seen increasingly from Holloway, both against Pettis and against Aldo himself. When he drew him onto things like those big 1-2s, that was because he did exactly what you'd expect Ortega to do in those kind of situations, is he drew him into big exchanges, then just pivoted off to the side and just cracked Aldo as he overcommitted. So I think the question is really one of lateral movement. And from the perspective of Moicano, I think, that's something that we've seen improve from him as well, but I don't think Moicano had that weapon in his arsenal when he fought Ortega. Or if he did, it was one that Ortega was able to nullify with just sheer volume, right? Yeah. Moicano likes to throw back. He doesn't like people to be pushing him. He'll always kind of aggressively feel like he needs to punch his way back into the fight. So he wasn't pivoting off and throwing his jab much. He was just kind of throwing it straight as a counter when Ortega came in. So I think that's the big question. That's the big question and the big advantage for Holloway, is his ability to move laterally and throw.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, especially I think you can confidently say that is something that would be effective against Ortega. Not just, we don't know how he deals with it yet, but we know one of the fundamental limitations of, you describe it as a boxing-based attack, but also an aggressive counter-punching attack that relies on a lot of head movement and a lot of big loaded-up punches, is that you have to plant your feet. And those things tend to be a lot more effective when you can push someone back more linearly, or at least get the chance to plant your feet and stand right in front of them. And every single time that Ortega has to slip a jab, every single time that he has to pull his head back, or every single time that he throws a shot, is an opportunity for a really agile mover like Holloway to just basically get out of his sights. And one of the things Holloway is really, really good at is getting out of your sights while continuing to hit you with lots of shit. So yeah, I think we're probably looking at a lot of attrition for Brian Ortega. It still doesn't make me feel confident that he's going to get knocked out of this fight, though. He tends to build, he tends to double down with aggression. Perhaps it will turn out that his chin is more reliable than Max's this time around, and it just won't make a difference. But yeah, it does feel like a lot of increasingly layered exchanges maybe going the way of Max, as Ortega just sort of has to resort to chasing him rather than getting him into such a position where he has no choice but to exchange.
Yeah, I think that's basically the fact that the fundamental thing is that I think Holloway just has more ways of taking this fight than Ortega does. I mean, Ortega's takedown completion rate is not good. It's normally, he normally gets his takedowns through, well, he normally gets grappling exchanges through scaring people into shooting on him, or through kind of weird snap-down scenarios. I mean, that's one of his clever tall man adaptions that he's got in his game, right, is that he throws shots, and as you roll or slip under them, he can, as Cub Swanson did, he can then just kind of grab a headlock. He just grabs a kind of snap down series.
Yep. That new guy, Roosevelt Roberts, same shit. Just like lots of standing guillotine attacks and things. Like these are not things that the modern mixed martial artist is used to looking out for. It's just having their neck attacked before they even think they're wrestling.
Yeah, James Vick has always been good at that as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good like tall man innovation, I think,
for sure.
But Holloway is equally as tall as him. Holloway does not sort of need to dip and roll his head in the same way that like a Swanson or an Edgar did. I don't think those are really going to be huge threats here. Holloway relies on his foot movement more than he does that footwork more than he does, exaggerated rolls and slips anyway. And yeah, he's a better kicker. He's more defensively sound in general.
His clinch game doesn't seem to leave him vulnerable to that kind of stuff either. Like, he likes the overhook in the frame. He doesn't tend to like get into these low wrestling positions. Just sort of tries to make space and skirt out, which I think will work quite nicely maybe against the threatening clinch of Ortega.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen Paul Gift's alternative stats article on the top two fights on this card, but it's great and well worth a look, and they always are.
Yes, they always are. So, I have not yet, but they are always really good.
So, for example, Max Holloway has not been taken down since Dennis Bermudez. And their power strike differential is, and how much they absorbed compared to deliver is phenomenally different. So Holloway outlands his opponents with 7 power shots per minute, and I think, and Ortega absorbs 21.4
per minute.
That seems. Wait a minute. Yes. Oh no, per 5 minutes. Sorry.
Okay.
No,
all right.
insane.
I was gonna say that's a lot.
Yeah, that would make him. That would make him someone that we needed to be worried about his brain health moving forward. No, sorry, per 5 minutes. My apologies, Paul.
Still.
But yeah, so Holloway plus 7, Ortega minus 21.4.
Yeah.
And that you got to take into account Ortega's significant improvements in that kind of space. But overall, you got to think Ortega's game expands over time. He puts in more body shots. He layers in more combinations. Holloway's does as well, but it expands in more ways. It expands, he uses more lateral movement. He uses lighter shots to set up harder ones, and he uses more kicks. And the places that Ortega's game can go to, headlock series, front chokes, countering takedowns, those seem just unlikely to work.
Yeah. Yeah, they always talk about creativity with fighters like Ortega. I say I use the word creativity to describe guys like Ortega and Yoel Romero. And they have plenty of it. But there's a certain kind of like understated creativity to guys like Max Holloway as well. Like he still does plenty of crazy, weird, unorthodox techniques. But his creativity sort of like is based more on, I don't know, feeling all of the, what's a good way of saying this? Messing with things like rhythm and timing, messing with he's comfortable messing around with a limited palette in a lot of ways. And he does not have a limited palette. So there's a lot of permutations for the many, many types of like combinations of attacks that Max Holloway could be throwing at you. And like, yeah, I agree. It just sucks that maybe Max Holloway's health could be one of the like determining X factors to keep in mind here. But it does feel like, I still have some faith in Holloway. He's really good. He's really fucking good, and I want him to be all right, and I want him to win this fight. So call it picking with heart if you will, but I think there's a fairly good case to assume that Holloway is just not going to be overwhelmed by the kind of stuff Ortega has successfully overwhelmed other fighters with, because we've already seen him use. I mean, for fuck's sake, before he was as good as he is now, go back to the Conor McGregor fight. Still having trouble, but compare it to everyone else McGregor was fighting at the time, and you will see someone who was dealing in a very poised way with a long, dangerous striker and constantly calculating and computing and trying to figure out, how do I turn this matchup in my favor? And like, fuck, 2 more rounds maybe Max Holloway could have won them both. You never know. He's just that kind of fighter. So, yeah, I'm going to take Max Holloway here. I think he's going to retain his title, and it'll be good. You going the same way?
Yep. I pretty much got to. As much as Ortega's improvements are impressive, and he's got that weird capability of winning fights that he's not winning.
Mm-hmm.
I think it might be like weirdly. I think it might actually be, and I've changed my mind on this. It might be oddly one-sided. Because I've been thinking more about the way the lateral matchup plays out, and I think we might see Max just diffuse Ortega from the start, and Ortega might just be adapting at a lower level than Holloway right from the beginning. So, and I'm not sure. So Ortega's been tremendously difficult to finish. I'm not sure if I'm going to predict a finish, but like Holloway is also he's a killer over 5 rounds.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about Ortega's 3rd round finishes, but yeah, give Holloway 25 minutes, and that is a lot of time for him to figure out just exactly how to put you away.
Yeah, so I think Holloway might finish him in the later rounds, and if he does, it's going to be kind of ugly, I think, because we've seen how tough Ortega is. I mean,
right.
He also all-time tough, and I think it will take a hell of a lot to put him away.
Yeah. All right. Well, either way, we're in for an extremely compelling featherweight title fight between two of the best mixed martial artists in the world, irrespective of weight class right now. So, look forward to that as much as we are if you know what's good for you. And let's take a break. When we come back after this, the women's flyweight title is on the line between Valentina Shevchenko and Joanna Jedrzejczyk. As I said before, the 4th fight between them. I don't know why I'm covering these details again. This isn't a radio show. You already heard it. And we'll be talking about it more extensively in the next segment. So, after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Hello and welcome back to Heavy Hands. The women's flyweight title is on the line. I hope I blew your speakers out with that back. I don't know. It was way too loud. Welcome back to the show. Women's flyweight title, Valentina Shevchenko, Joanna Jedrzejczyk. The 4th fight between these two women. 3 of them contested, as far as we know, between 2006 and 2008 in the sport of Muay Thai, or something sort of like Muay Thai, but with a lot more body pads and headgear and, Did they have elbows? I think they could throw elbows. I'm not sure. But it's tough, Phil. I would love to get a closer look at those fights, but it's kickboxing of some form. And it was 2 women that no one knew anything about, really, before, relatively recently. And so the only footage online that I've been able to find is essentially a Valentina Shevchenko highlight. And I don't just say that because Valentina Shevchenko is my sworn enemy. I say it because the channel which put the video out has nothing but videos about Valentina Shevchenko. So it's difficult to get a whole idea of how those fights went, but you can certainly see a lot of the successful counters and things that Val hit Joanna with. You can see a lot of the mistakes that Joanna ran into over and over again. It's very compelling, intriguing to look back at those matchups and try to figure out if anything stylistically has changed between in either of these women to the extent that a 4th fight under MMA rules will go any differently. So, rain on the parade and tell me why nothing's changed.
Like, in one way, there is just something disappointing about this let me start again. People don't change much over time. Often when someone has a bad style matchup, it often stays a bad style matchup basically forever.
Yeah.
You can look at someone's tough fights when they were younger, and you can often see like the seeds of you can see the seeds of how they would lose later on. You know, you can look back at Anthony Pettis versus Bart Palashevsky and see like little fragments of, you know, why RDA would be a bad style matchup for him, for example. That people tend to, the sort of basic shapes of why person A struggles with person B, these things don't actually tend to change that much over time.
Because
and yeah, like
style is a product of personality. Style is temperament. Yeah. And if you don't like someone as a child, there's a good chance you will not be friends as adults. You know what I mean? A lot of people just sort of stay the same.
Yeah, and sometimes people just fit poorly with one another, or one person just kind of naturally has the other one's number. And those matchups, you know, if you see those Muay Thai fights, they are kind of funny, right? Because you can and illuminating, because you can see that they start, you know, there's all three of them in one video, right? And of just largely just highlights of Shevchenko, but you can see that the two of them have almost no idea of what they're doing in the first one. It's just pure clinch and rushing forward, and neither one of them is particularly, you know, really knows how to fight. They aren't actually terribly recognizable in any way. And then by the time the third one rolls around, you can actually see them. You can actually see who they're starting to be at this point. And so the main thing is, so that's just basically my contention, is that it's really hard to change. It's really hard for someone not to have your number anymore, in a way that like is, if they've beaten you 3 straight times and this is in a scenario where there are more of the elements which it looked like Joanna struggled with than there were in those fights. Namely, that a lot of Shevchenko's success was in the clinch. She was then and is now just a bigger, more powerful fighter. All of those highlights of just Shevchenko hulking Jedrzejczyk. Yeah. And so there's now more clinch work, more ground game. Why is it going to be different?
Well, yeah. I mean, do you think Joanna Jedrzejczyk has gotten better at clinching maybe since then? I mean, I think she's now regarded as one of the more fearsome clinch fighters in women's MMA. Right? I mean, pretty fairly, I think. Savage elbows, a much more wrestling-based approach. Yeah, the thing is like you watch those highlights, and it's a lot of like Joanna. This is a problem I think that is probably inherent, is that you give Joanna like a blank canvas, she's gonna try to throw some fucking paint on it. You give her an opponent whose main goal is to wait and to maintain distance, and that is something that Valentina Shevchenko is very, very good at, is distance management. She does not allow her opponent to move around without adjusting, so that she is almost immediately after they start to move, she is almost immediately at the same distance she was before they moved, right? She's always mirroring her opponent so that they always have to cross this gulf to get to her. It's hard to imagine Joanna Jedrzejczyk being given a matchup like that and having like the patience to sort of feint and play around and figure out a really safe way in. But what happened a lot in those Muay Thai fights seemed to be Joanna leading with big naked body kicks and getting taken down by Thai sweeps. And, you know, like, she's a pretty fucking good scrambler and wrestler now. Like, she's pretty good. She's gone against some people who have tried to catch her legs and take her down, who are really, really good at that, and shut them the hell down, to the extent that she has been often called, and by me as well, the female Jose Aldo. She's been very, very difficult to take down, and also very, very good at punishing people who try to take her down. The difference, of course, is that like Shevchenko's not a shot takedown artist. Her takedowns do come from the clinch, or these twisting, wrenching kinds of takedowns. Does that fundamentally alter Jedrzejczyk's ability to grab an overhook and belly down and make sure that she just never settles for bottom position? I mean, just having that instinct trained into her seems like a pretty good defense to the kinds of takedowns that Shevchenko prefers.
Yeah, she's very good at, I think Joanna is very good at kind of attacking the head when she's in clinch positions in particular. No, she's really good at kind of pushing off. She's really like, she's not afraid to get like real dirty and grimy in the clinch, going all the way back to that first Claudia Gadelha fight. She doesn't really give a shit if her fingers go in the other person's eyes.
No,
or
at times she seems to be looking for it.
Yep. Yeah, just very good at, and very quick as well. Very like Jose Aldo, she goes through the steps of like peeling the hands, getting her own position, pushing off, striking, resetting. She goes through it all very, very, very quickly.
Methodical,
and all of that is great.
Decisive.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that will definitely be like a major advantage, and as will her tendency not to just, that she is now much more defined as an outside striker and is not just going to be like, I'm going to rush this person and, I'm going to somehow physically overpower her, which is exactly what it looked like she kept trying to do in those Thai fights. She's, she is someone with borderline delusional amounts of confidence. And so you could see her like, you could probably see her like trying to do the same thing but better 3 times.
Yes.
Against when she was young and inexperienced against someone like Shevchenko. So I think the 2 major questions here are who's the best counterpuncher that Joanna has fought at strawweight, and how much more physical and aggressive is Shevchenko down at what is pretty much her natural weight class?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's important to keep in mind we've only seen Shevchenko at flyweight once.
Yeah, and she absolutely kicked the shit out of Priscilla Cachoeira.
But against an utterly, I didn't want to say the word incompetent, an utterly outmatched opponent. Someone who is very clearly not on her level in a way that even like Jedrzejczyk cannot possibly be. Even having beaten her 3 times.
Yeah, but it was also like, I've heard some criticism of that fight from like Shevchenko's end, but this does seem a little puzzling to me. Is that you really can't beat someone much worse than she did?
Yeah,
I mean, she absolutely wrecked her, but it was also, and it was pretty aggressive as well. She didn't, it wasn't like she was like, I'm going to test out my counterpunching here. I mean, she did, but she closed in pretty quickly. And this is in general what I haven't seen much of Shevchenko's Muay Thai fights, but apparently, she was a much more aggressive fighter when she was fighting people her own size. And so, on that note, I would say, like, we can think of another fighter that you hate, Frankie Edgar.
Oh no, I used to hate Frankie Edgar. I'm now a big Frankie Edgar fan.
So what was it that made you not hate Frankie Edgar? Was there some particular point in his career where maybe some kind of size-based change that might have been some kind of catalyst to you not hating Frankie Edgar?
Listen, it was a period of personal growth. All right, it had nothing to do with the relative growth of Frankie Edgar's opponents, and everything to do with me being able to appreciate what Frankie Edgar was doing. I also used to hate Dominic Cruz. I was a little shit. I couldn't appreciate great defensive mixed martial arts at a point in time. So I don't think it was just that Frankie got more aggressive against smaller opponents. I would like to see more aggression. My question is, with more aggression, is that the change that Joanna Jedrzejczyk has made to her style that makes her more effective against an aggressive counterpuncher? She is a much, much better back foot out fighter than she ever was as a kickboxer. That was never her style before. She was always an aggressive, more kick-oriented fighter. It took her ages in her MMA career to even get around to the point where she started reintroducing her kicks. And boy, do I expect a lot of what we saw in the Nunes-Shevchenko fights. A lot of sort of tapping low kicks with the lead leg from long range, because both of these ladies like to do that. But if Shevchenko is more aggressive, You know, like, who have we seen her take on that has a really good jab and excellent footwork with that style? All we've seen her be aggressive against in MMA is Priscilla Cachoeira, who didn't know how to stop literally anything that Shevchenko did, including her striking, and yet Shevchenko's strategy, I don't lobby this as a criticism because she still fucking destroyed Cachoeira, but her approach was to take Cachoeira down because she knew she was more dangerous on top on the ground. That was where she would have a grip on her opponent. Her size would be a factor. If she cannot get to those kinds of positions against a more evasive fighter, then how good is her aggressive counterpunching game? You know what I mean? How venomous are her strikes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely worth thinking about. I mean, of the two, obviously, Jedrzejczyk is definitely the one that we've seen improve much more. As you mentioned, she blossomed into a really effective MMA boxer, and then brought back her kicks into it. You know, it's one of the more impressive stylistic evolutions that we've seen, in that she clearly recognized, you know, I can't use these yet. Now I can use these. You know, now that I've entirely figured out how my boxing and takedown defense and clinch game works in the context of MMA, now it's time to bring these back.
Yes. The adaptation of Joanna Jedrzejczyk's full MMA game, her growth as a mixed martial artist, in ways that, you know, not only has her basic fundamental striking improved, but she has developed a game, a style that is very different from the one she used to have as a Muay Thai fighter, still including elements of it, but one that seems to work not only better for this sport, but better for this matchup. Like, it's hard for me. It is still a little hard for me to imagine Valentina Shevchenko effectively coming forward with enough volume or good enough pressure footwork that she can force those clinches on Jedrzejczyk. And I don't know. Like, it's still possible too that Shevchenko, I'm not 100% sold on the idea that Shevchenko fights this fight that aggressively just because she's down a weight class or just because she has that confidence from experience against Jedrzejczyk in particular. So I don't know. Like, to me, it might be more dangerous if she fights off the back foot and Joanna has to figure out ways to get after her. And Joanna doesn't have great head movement. She can get countered and all that. But it is a little hard for me to imagine Shevchenko sort of bullying Jedrzejczyk, being a good enough aggressive mixed martial artist to do that.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of it. So I am going to be picking Shevchenko, and a lot of this is, you know, on the understanding that she was fundamentally a more aggressive fighter when she was fighting in Muay Thai and kickboxing, when she was fighting people who were her own size. I mean, when she was up against Amanda Nunes, for example, that was a fairly colossal size differential that she was up against.
Yep. And she was also much more aggressive against Cachoeira, as you said. Yep.
And, you know, if we think of aggressive counterpunching, clinch takedowns, stuff like the second Gadelha fight with Joanna Jedrzejczyk was... It's sort of remembered as being more one-sided than it was because there was such a clear turning point.
Yeah.
But if that turning point had been later, Jedrzejczyk would have been in trouble. She was down 2 rounds and then was losing the third until Gadelha suddenly ran out of steam. So I think Shevchenko she's a bigger fighter than Gadelha. She's a better counterpuncher. She's proven over their earlier fights, as sort of meaningless as those are, that she can hit clinch takedowns on Jedrzejczyk, that I think she can sort of replicate the Gadelha plan, but better. I mean, Gadelha is an athletic counterpuncher. She is not a particularly, like, her punching form is not good, but she was still able to crack Jedrzejczyk a few times. So I think she can probably replicate the Gadelha Jedrzejczyk plan, just keep it up for longer and kind of not gas herself out. I think it might be close, and I think Jedrzejczyk might start closing the gap again, much as she did the last time. And I would probably rather see Jedrzejczyk win. I do like her style more. I consider her to be a more, as you kind of said, a better archetype of what I consider a good MMA striker to be in context. But I still think that this is going to be another tough matchup for her.
Yeah, well, Valentina's punches may be more technical than Gedelia's, Phil, but what happens when you literally only have 2 punches in your arsenal, bitch? Huh? What now? What about when you only throw right hooks and left straights? Come on. Come on, man. Joanna can figure that out. Come on, Joanna, please.
Come on, Joanna.
Please figure it out. All right. Yeah, it's a super exciting matchup. It's just phenomenally interesting and endlessly fascinating to me. It's one of those fights that I will be very nervous right up until the moment that it ends. And that is the feeling I like to capture. That's why I followed this sport in the first place. So I'm really looking forward to it. Hopefully all of you guys listening are as well, but we are not done yet. Speaking of exciting matchups, we're going to be talking about a few undercard bouts in segment 3 after this, namely Gunnar Nelson versus Cowboy Oliveira, Jimmy Manuwa versus Thiago Santos, Claudia Gadelha versus Nina Ansarov, all of that after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
We're good to go. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're talking about some welterweights to kick things off. I did not have to check and look to remind myself what division this fight was taking place in at all. Don't worry about it. Cowboy Oliveira versus Gunnar Nelson. This one is the fault of our listeners, or at least those of you who look at things on Twitter, because yesterday I was publicly shaming Phil for, admittedly jokingly, but not a funny joke, a bad joke, a very dark joke, suggesting that we cover Chikagi and I as one of our featured fights for this episode when we have such limited space and have to be so choosy about which fights we actually get to talk about. And you may have seen in there that my suggestions for the fights included, like Devin Clark versus Alexander Rakic. And you people didn't want to hear that. You were like, I don't want to hear about a technical and exciting up-and-coming light heavyweight prospect against a big athletic wrestling threat. I don't want to see prospects getting tested. I want to see Cowboy Oliveira and Gunnar Nelson, 2 guys whose styles are utterly perplexing, very difficult to understand and analyze, and one of whom Connor famously hates. So that's what we're going to talk about now. It's a weird matchup, Phil. That may be the reason that I didn't think of it off the top, is I was kind of thinking, what do I say about these guys? Like, I don't really know how their styles work. I'm not afraid to admit that. They're weird fighters.
Yeah. So these are 2 fighters who are both very good and weirdly not good. So, in completely different ways, they are both all offense, no defense fighters.
Yeah.
Alex Oliveira is a fairly natural counter-striker who has never really evolved beyond being the kind of natural counter-striker he was when he first came to the UFC.
Yep.
It's still always basically been a big pullback right hand.
Mm-hmm.
And his main evolution in the time since has to become a more effective wrestler.
Yep.
And not particularly in a tremendously technical way. I describe his wrestling as being like Colby Covington's striking, in that it is enthusiastic more so than it is actually good.
Mm-hmm.
And that can do a lot of heavy lifting for you when you are giant and long and have lots of leverage and clearly freakishly, unbelievably strong, so that he can just kind of lock up body locks and haul people to the ground and beat the shit out of them and rear naked choke them. So defensively, he is pretty much a blank slate, apart from the fact that if you try and punch him, he will occasionally step backwards and kill you immediately with the right hand. Gunnar Nelson is also defensively a blank slate, apart from the fact that occasionally when you try and punch him, he will pull back and kill you with the right hand.
Yes, very well done. Yeah, that's sort of the basic here. I do just want to emphasize your point about the defensive blank slateness. Now, this is, some credit to Gunnar Nelson here, because he's now fighting a fighter with worse striking defense statistics than himself, which is not common. Alex Oliveira absorbs his striking defense, according to Fight Metric, in the UFC is 46%. So he gets hit by more than half of the strikes his opponents attempt against him. Gunnar Nelson, however, can be very proud of 51%. So not quite half.
Over 50? I don't know why you dislike this guy, Connor.
Defense is hard in MMA, so I give people a lot of benefit of the doubt. But these guys do not have good defensive games. Yeah, they're very offensively focused. Both good judges of distance. That's the thing. They're just not thinking of defense, I think. Or don't have, frankly, like Gunnar Nelson just doesn't have defensive skills trained into him. Doesn't have consistent head movement. That just doesn't have those reactions built into his style. And nor does Cowboy Oliveira. And that's a problem, get a fucking boxing coach and learn how to pull and slip and dip and roll and get away from punches. But yeah, they both understand very well how to cover distance quickly, how to judge and time their strikes. But as for everything the opponent is doing, no. So general style matchup. One part of me is really tempted to take Alex Oliveira, because I do think he is a naturally bigger and stronger man.
He is definitely the round winner in this matchup.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
If this goes long, if this goes 3 rounds, then it's almost impossible not to pick Oliveira, just because he does more.
Yeah.
And he's got a pretty nasty snap kick to the body. He's just fights at a higher pace, and we've seen Gunnar Nelson historically in fights which go long. He just doesn't have very many ideas.
He's only ever won one decision, Gunnar Nelson.
Yeah.
And that was against Jorge Santiago. Every
weird,
other time.
Right?
Every other time. Yeah, right. Every other time he has to finish his opponent, or he loses a decision, or more recently gets finished himself. So at the very least, Alex Oliveira just, it's often ugly, but just making his opponent fight him constantly is a feather in his cap in this matchup. But then again, is his wrestling and jiu-jitsu nearly good enough to, that's the thing that so often his opponents have to constantly contend with, is he just wraps himself around them like some more athletic Bojan Veličković and doesn't give them space to breathe. And it is hard to imagine that being the same kind of problem for a fighter like Gunnar Nelson as it was for, Tim Means,
Yeah, so, and that's the thing, is that Oliveira is clearly relies on being insulated by his athleticism when it comes to the grappling exchanges. He's just utterly confident he's going to totally overpower people and be able to just crush them there. There's a sequence where he had Yancy Medeiros' back, and Yancy Medeiros just flips him over and sweeps him. Mm-hmm. And Yancy Medeiros is not the world's deadliest grappler. And
how dare you?
Yeah. And in general, I feel that Gunnar Nelson has been very good at taking out people who rely on being fast and athletic and tricky. You can see the philosophy of his style, right? Is that it is the 3-dimensional karate focus. One hit, one kill. He's either knocking you out with one punch, or he's trying to get the perfect knockdown or takedown into back take and rear naked choke. Mm-hmm. And he is a phenomenal finisher when it comes to that kind of approach. He landed shots on Ponzinibbio before he just got, he just realized he wasn't as good a striker and got poked in the eyes. And if we think about guys who are all offense, no defense, and against kind of really lethal snipers, really dangerous finishers, I think of both Oliveira's and Yancy Medeiros' fights against the other cowboy and Donald Cerrone, in that they were both just like, oh yeah, we're going to have a knockdown, drag-out war with this guy, and Donald Cerrone was just like, no, I'm just going to instantly submit you.
And someone who moved up to the division as well. If like your concern is the size difference, like there's very clearly both of these guys rely on their athleticism a lot. Gunnar Nelson is the only one of them who has an aspect of his game where he would be really good at it without his athleticism.
Yeah, and he's a phenomenal sniper early, and he is a better early finisher than Alex Oliveira is. Oliveira, just tends to crush people over, the period of over like 2 to 3 rounds. He just overwhelms them physically, and he can certainly do that. But I just think he's too defensively porous, and Nelson will either crack him or take him down and just instantly submit him in the first round.
Yeah. I think I'm with you. It's a rare pick, but I think.
Oh God, he's going to lose now, isn't he?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
When was the last time you picked Gunnar Nelson?
Yeah, we were trying to figure this out.
Was it Rick Story? Did you pick him to beat
I think
Rick
I
Story?
picked Rick Story. I was a fucking Rick Story mark back in the day. So I think I picked Rick Story in that matchup.
Okay, you definitely picked Zach Cummings to beat him.
I don't remember, but there's very little doubt that I didn't. Because, listen, folks, this is a show about analysis, and I only make my picks based on the cold, hard facts. All right? So I definitely don't have certain 5 fighters I'm more likely to pick because I like and therefore understand their styles more. I don't know. Did I pick Alan Jouban? Because I also like Alan Jouban. But did I pick Alan Jouban over?
You did.
I'm
pretty sure you did.
That would have been crazy, right? Please, no one look up whether or not I did that. I don't want to be proven wrong.
I think I'm going to say that the last time you picked him was Amari Akhmadov.
In 2014.
I'm holding to that. Yeah.
You think I picked Alan Jouban over him?
Yes.
Damn it. I really hope you're not right, but you might be. Okay, all right. Okay, well, I'm picking him here. All right, so he's gonna lose.
You've cussed him now.
Rejoice.
Thanks.
He's finally gonna lose when he fucking deserves it. I don't know. He seems like a nice guy, Gunnar Nelson. I have no issue with him as a person. He seems great. All right, let's move on. Light heavyweights. We'll cover these ones relatively quickly, just so we don't go way over here. But Jimmy Manuwa, Thiago Santos. This fight is going to be a hyper athletic mess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
Because Thiago Santos is in it mostly. But also, I don't know that Jimmy Manuwa knows how to avoid, damn. Here's a question to ask before we discuss this matchup in earnest. Who is the most Thiago Santos-like fighter that Jimmy Manuwa has fought? It's probably OSP?
Yeah.
But OSP is not as, wild and aggressive as Santos.
Yeah, OSP is also, a worse striker.
Yeah. True.
I would feel comfortable saying. But yeah, this is the thing, is that OSP, in retrospect, was primed for Jimmy Manuwa's particularly British brand of trickery. Which is that everyone knows, the classic British fighter in MMA was someone who only threw left hooks. And so that, there was just a whole breed of British fighters that came up.
Yep. Brad Pickett, Dan Hardy.
Yeah, Paul Daly.
Yep.
And all the guys they'd fought had just been primed to fight overhands.
Yep.
And then these British guys would just come up to them and they'd be like, I'm going to throw my left hand.
That is Jimmy Manuwa's whole game, isn't it? Because he's in light heavyweight, which is a division that still exists in the year 2002. So he just throws left hooks.
Yeah. More than that, it's because he always looks like he's loaded to throw from the right side of his body, and he literally never does. He's just like, is it going to be a right hand? Is it going to no? Is it going to be a no? It's going to be a left hand.
Yep.
And he's just going to go left hook, left high kick, and the entire right side of his body is an illusion.
Man, remember poor Kyle Kingsbury? He never could figure that game out. I don't think Manuwa threw a single right hand or right leg at him for the duration of their fight, but Kingsbury never saw the left kicks and hooks coming.
Yeah.
It works.
So like OSP was primed to throw the big left hand cross counter.
Yep.
And like Jimmy Manuwa just like walked up to him, was just like, left hook, dead.
Yep.
And so, yeah. So Santos is not a counter fighter. He's pretty aggressive.
Yep.
And he's a middleweight, so I'm picking him.
Yeah, because he's like a light heavyweight, but not as bad.
Right. Yeah, that's it.
Yep.
He's going to throw more kicks. He's going to be faster. He's definitely more durable than Jimmy Manuwa is, who is looking pretty shockingly frail. So, well, actually, not necessarily. He took some serious shots against Blachowicz. But I think, Manuwa's game is really quite limited. And yeah, I mean, Santos is a middleweight, and I'll pretty much most of the time pick them over light heavyweights just because the quality of striking is just so much better in that division. Yeah,
I think I tend to agree. Santos definitely has his technical issues, but he's willing to throw a whole lot of shit. He's effective at every range. At the very least, will throw down and fight back, which, like, let's be honest, not like Jan Blachowicz was hitting Jimmy Manuwa with the prettiest counter punches ever devised. He was merely throwing combinations. And it had a great effect because Manuwa would cover up in reaction to the first punch, and his head would just stay right there, his feet frozen, and frankly, Jan could have just been lucky and not put so much thought into the combinations he was throwing and probably still landed and possibly hurt him. And Santos throws a lot harder and a lot more and is in insanely good condition for a wild back-and-forth fight. So I have to favor him. I don't know that I'm confident he's a lot more durable than Manuwa, but I always have more hope for guys who move up and stop cutting so much weight, that their chins will improve. And at least so far, Santos has looked like that Anders fight, man. Like, he just pours all of his energy out there into every single thing he does, doesn't slow down, didn't seem fragile, and despite being knocked out, he sure as hell does not lack for confidence. Like, his body language never changes. He is just ready to throw down, no matter what's happening in the fight. So yeah, I have to take Santos, man.
Yeah, I really like Thiago Santos. He will fight anyone, anytime, and he's had horrible losses to like Mousasi and Spicely. It still seems bizarre, even in retrospect.
Look at the two.
He just keeps on trucking, keeps on fighting whoever he can, and as you said, probably the durability take on my end, probably not a particularly good one, seeing as Santos has not been very durable. So yeah, both of these guys could implode at any minute. They both throw with a shit ton of power. It'll be crazy dumb, and it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to it. Moving up from middleweight, I do always like to imagine that chins will improve. But all right, well, finally on to the women's strawweights. Our last fight for this episode: Nina Ansaroff versus Claudia Gadelha. I don't know. What do you think about this one, man? I want to hear your thoughts before I say anything and embarrass myself.
It is a tricky one, mainly because you just got to find yourself asking, how much do I trust Claudia Gadelha nowadays?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because it's not one that I necessarily would have had problems picking a couple of fights ago. But since, we've recently seen Gadelha just exhausting herself.
Mm-hmm.
And like she doesn't exactly know what she wants her style to be.
Mm-hmm.
So
she's become like this combination counterpuncher who, like, to the extent that, like, this is always a stylistic problem for certain fighters, but like she truly just doesn't seem to have any choice as to like when she has to start expending energy. It's like automatic. She's fighting. I don't know if you want to say fighting emotionally or too zeroed in on her opponent or whatever. But she gets into these exchanges, and it's like, well, now I have to start countering. Oh, now I've got hit. Now I have to start countering harder. She's just not a very thoughtful fighter. And so it seems like no matter what changes she makes in her training, her style, her style is like fundamentally limited by the fact that she just gets caught up in the fight, stops making good strategic decisions. And, like between the two of them, it's like Nina Ansaroff is certainly the fighter who's been making the bigger strides strategically in forging her own more complete MMA game.
Yep. Yeah, so we've definitely seen her develop as a much more functional range boxer.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly she's able to stop takedowns with movement rather than, having to meet them head on. She's shown an ability to, like, when she got into a volume kickboxing war with Angela Hill, she was able to just kind of outpower and outpace her. So yeah, I think we've seen a lot of impressive improvements from Ansaroff, and conversely, Gedalia seems a little lost. I mean that Esparza fight, I don't think I scored it for Esparza. It was much closer than I ever would have thought it could be.
Yeah,
just due to the size and physicality and offensive disparities between the two of them. I never would have thought that frankly that Carla Esparza would have much of a chance against Gedalia.
Yeah, but it's like if you can. Obviously, a big difference between Esparza and Gedalia is that Esparza is a substantially more experienced and better wrestler. And that has to be taken into account here. Like, that's why.
I don't know if better wrestler. I think more experienced is definitely part of it. I think it was, just the pure trickiness. In terms of who's like a more consistent takedown threat in the UFC, it's almost certainly Gedalia, but that's like, there are lots of better punchers than Gedalia, but Gedalia is still one of the most effective counterpunchers in this division because she's ridiculously athletic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it was essentially like despite the differences, Esparza revealed something that we probably have always known to some extent, that if you just make Claudia Gedalia fight, it's going to be a fight. Like if you can just convince her to throw down and get her to forget the matchup as a big picture, forget her strategy, then it's going to end up being close if you're up for it as much or more than she is. And yeah, like fights like that Angela Hill fight, Ansaroff is down for a scrap. She's going to force Gedalia to fight, and I don't trust Gedalia to have the wherewithal to refuse, or to just tie her up, even the way that she did Jedrzejczyk. Because it's not just that Claudia's, it's not just that she's got her inherent stylistic problems that have always been there, but she's in the midst of like this very aimless transitional period too, where she's clearly trying to work out how she should be fighting, what she should be changing. Nothing's quite working, but it's possible it's kind of making her like worse overall, because now there's less confidence behind this sort of processless, aimless style of hers.
Yeah, and she's bounced around a hell of a lot of gyms.
Yep.
Gedalia. She's so looking just at her Wikipedia, her fighting out of lists Luttrell Yi MMA, the UFC Performance Institute, Extreme Couture, Jackson Wink, and Nova União.
Yeah. She's been, and maybe not even giving herself time to settle in because things haven't been improving as quickly or the way she wants them to. But yeah, she's clearly still trying to figure this out. And as an experienced fighter, like, you don't want to be in a position where you're trying to figure things out against someone who has a lot of upward momentum.
Yeah. And, as far as an athletic but slightly unstructured and aggressive fighter goes, Ansaroff just beat Randa Marcos.
Mm-hmm.
And, Marcos is not the wrestler or really the power striker that Gedalia is, but she's certainly able to keep a better pace. I think in the end, I probably still favor Marcos. I still favor Gedalia, just because Ansaroff does always give up takedowns from the, from her loss to Lima to that Marcos fight. She had to fight off her back a lot. And Gedalia is still a very a very explosive wrestler and just nasty from the top position. Just like one of the, with the exception of Jessica Andrade, just the one person you just don't want to be stuck underneath.
Yeah.
In this division. And, you know, she's a much better round winner from top position than Marcos is, even if she can't maintain that kind of pace. So, I mean, I've got to favor her, but not with any kind of confidence at all.
Yeah. If Gedelia's problem is that she doesn't get to choose when to turn on and or off her offense, at the very least, you can rely on her to force Ansarov to deal with a fairly layered and aggressive wrestling attack. Which I'm still not, I don't have that much confidence in Ansarov's second and third layers of takedown defense to believe that she'll be able to deal with that. And, the fact that Ansarov still has not shown much of like a sort of, to use the term, a modern MMA get-up game, or the urgency that I think, like, at least according to Fight Metric, Marcos got one takedown in that fight, but Ansarov had to spend a decent amount of time fighting off of her back. Against
I don't think she stood up from it. I think it was in the first round, and she rode out the clock there.
Right, and yeah, that's the kind of thing where, like, I don't know, you give Gedalia a takedown in the first round, and then 3 minutes of top control. You have already sacrificed a round in which you needed to be making her work much, much harder in order to set yourselves up for the second and third. So I think I agree. Gedalia, I still have faith in her wrestling and her grappling, her physicality to find the right holes, even by accident, in Ansarov's game, such as it is. But it's more interesting than it would have been even a year ago, 2 years ago. So, still a compelling fight, still a very good card, UFC 231. I hope you guys are psyched, because, boy, it's no UFC Beijing. You know, it's no UFC, what was the other one? Where were they? In Chile or somewhere. I can't keep anything straight. Where's Chito Vera from? Where the fuck was that card in South America?
They were not in Ecuador.
No, they weren't in Ecuador.
He called out for Ecuador.
Yeah. Well, it's better than those cards. This is something worth watching. That's the point I'm trying to make. My brain is melted by being confronted by a truly compelling and high quality UFC card, but, we deserve it, goddammit. We've earned this, and, I hope it's as good as we're all hoping it will be. So, before we wrap up, Phil, do you have things coming out this week?
Yeah, so I've got the previews for obviously the main and co-main that I'll be writing with my partner in crime, David Castillo. And also I'm trying to work on I was working on a piece about like the decline of the UFC's middle class of draws, but I've changed that into a similar piece of like, why did the UFC let Sage Northcutt go? And what does this tell us about their strategy? And what kind of company they are. So hopefully that will be coming out soon. I've got some time to write it up now. I'm not quite as busy at work, so hopefully, yeah, keep an eye out.
Are you going to write about how they evidently offered him a matchup with Damian Maia?
Oh yeah, he would have deserved that.
Like, what the fuck is the thought process there?
We're paying you $5,000 extra per fight. Now fight. Now fight this guy.
Yeah. Fight a guy who might be a better grappler than Brian Barberena. Time will tell. Yeah, okay. Looking forward to that. As for me, try to hold me to it, listeners, but I'm working on 2 articles this week. A quick sort of nice and easy technical look back at Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder, which was a great fight. And I have taken the route of ignoring the controversy of the judges' scorecards and just celebrating some of the cool shit that happened in it. Because I feel like sometimes that's what you gotta do. You have to appreciate the fight for what it is. That and something on UFC 231 I think I'll probably end up writing about Jedrzejczyk versus Shevchenko. So keep an eye out for a pair of technical breakdowns from me this week. And boy, I'm really going to do my damnedest to make sure that they get out to you guys. Hope you enjoy reading them. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Find us on the social media with your comments, your questions, your concerns, your criticisms, your call-outs, and your callbacks. You can find Phil at Evil Greg Jackson on Twitter.com and myself at Boxing Bush. That's BUSCH. Otherwise, find our shit over on Bloody Elbow. If you don't know where to find other videos and stuff, I'm going to try and do some videos coming up. check us out, the Heavy Hands channel on YouTube. There's some boxing analysis videos, but also all of the latest string of episodes of this show. And of course, check out our Patreon as well. We have been putting out bonus episodes, and it's been fun. So, recent episode with Mookie Alexander, Phil and I did one talking about the last 2 weeks' cards. There will be more stuff like that coming out as we move forward. We appreciate your contributions, we appreciate your patronage, and we appreciate you doing as little as just listening. So, until next time, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you know you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.
But ASMR is mostly like people doing weird, like whispery shit to like produce.
Let's have this be Heavy Hands ASMR edition. How's that?
You know there's a market for that. Or we just talk like this for the whole episode.
Yes. Hi, Boxing Bush here. Welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands.